Hello everyone, I am Akhila Manasa, a PhD scholar from Risha Lab at IIT Tirupati, India. Here, I'll be presenting our work, Understanding Emotions of Developer Community Towards Software Documentation, authored by myself and Dr. Sridhar Chimalakonda. Among many of the open source platforms available, GitHub is observed to be the most popular one among developers, with more than 28 million public GitHub repositories and more than 40 million developers. Majority of the developers contribute to projects which are fast evolving and frequently updated. Also, majority of these projects are frequently reused. To reuse or to contribute a project, going to the source code alone is not sufficient. Documentation of the project would be very much helpful in both contributing and reusing the project. However, documentation is observed to have several issues which include insufficiency, incompleteness, ill-maintainability, and so on. When documentation is so helpful, why does documentation have so many issues? We thought understanding developer perception could answer this question. Developers could have varied range of perceptions, which include both positive or negative emotions. But in the first place, how can we understand developer perceptions? We observed that some of the studies in literature assess sentiments of commit messages to understand perceptions in different contexts, such as code refactoring or bugs in a software. Some of these studies are displayed here. A study with 29 projects and 60,000 commit messages of these projects revealed that developers express more number of negative emotions towards projects written in Java programming language. Another study with 28,000 projects reveals that there exists at least 10% more negative emotions than positive in the projects. A study with 16 projects and 3,000 commit messages extracted from these projects reveals that negative emotions are observed during the code refactoring phase. Another study on 13 projects with 171,000 commit messages revealed that developers express more negative emotions towards bug fixes. Considering these studies, we thought a similar approach could be followed to understand developer perception towards documentation by assessing sentiments of commit messages which are related to documentation. We observed from the literature that majority of the commit messages have negative emotions, and also documentation has many issues. So we started off with a hypothesis that developers could have negative perception towards documentation, which is the result that it has a lot of issues. We started off by extracting 1000 GitHub repositories from GHTorrent dataset. Then we filtered out non-English repositories from these, which resulted in a set of 998 repositories. Then we extracted commit messages which are related to documentation. To do so, we identified commits which are related to files with extensions .txt and .md and commit messages with readme or license keywords in their textual sentences. This resulted in a list of 6,549 commits. On extraction of messages from these commits, it resulted in a set of 10,996 commit messages. So finally, our data set comprised of 10,996 commit messages extracted from 998 public GitHub repositories. All these messages were passed through a sentiment analyzer to understand the emotions being expressed. We used useItNRC package, which classifies the messages into 8 different emotion categories. We observed the following distribution of emotions among these messages. We observed trust to be the most frequently expressed emotion category, and also that 78.4% of the emotions expressed are positive, while only 21.6% are negative. We observed that 4,948 messages out of the 10,996 messages expressed trust emotion, while only 220 of the 10,996 expressed disgust emotion. So our hypothesis that developers have a negative perception towards updating documentation is proved to be wrong. But what can we deduce from this result? The only thing we could say was existing documentation might be reliable according to developers of the project, and only because of this reason, the developers do not frequently update documentation or do not maintain it properly, thinking that it is already well maintained. However, we need to perform more studies in this direction to identify specific reasons of why documentation has so many issues. The dataset of the study is available on Zenodo. So we assumed a few constraints and also faced a few challenges in performing this study. Firstly, we considered only commit messages. Other artifacts such as pull requests, issues, and discussions in issues could also give us valuable insights on developer perceptions as they are also logged by developers. Further, we considered only a specific criteria to filter commits, which is the inclusion of readme or license keywords in the messages or commits corresponding to .txt or .md files. Other commits could also relate to documentation but could not have satisfied this constraint. Furthermore, some of the messages which were satisfied this constraint might not be related to documentation also. So we need to manually analyze the commit messages to extract documentation related commit messages specifically. Furthermore, majority of the commit messages did not express any specific emotion. Most of them considered only the keywords readme, init, version, add, and so on, which do not express any emotion. Then, the accuracy of our emotion distribution is dependent on this user NRC package. Using a different sentiment analyzer could result in different distribution of the emotions. So these are some of the references that we followed. So we started off to answer the question of why documentation has so many issues. Then we thought understanding developer perception could help us in knowing the reasons for issues in documentation. So based on the literature, we identified that commit messages and the sentiments in commit messages could be analyzed to understand developer perception. Based on the literature and the issues in documentation, we started off with the hypothesis that developers might have negative emotion towards documentation. So we started off with 1000 GitHub repositories and arrived at a data set of 998 GitHub repositories and 10,996 commit messages, which were analyzed to extract sentiments from these messages. Our distribution of emotions showed that majority of these messages showed trust emotion, while only 20% or 21% of these messages were having negative emotions. So our hypothesis that developers have a negative perception was proved to be wrong. So we thought developers might be having more trust towards the documentation, which is the result of documentation not being updated frequently. However, to further comment on the reasons for issues in documentation, we see that there is a need for further studies in this direction. And if you have any queries, you can reach us out on the below mentioned email IDs.